Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. Today, we're going to be taking a look at diversity, equity, and inclusion.
DEI.
DEI, yeah.
Yeah.
And we're going to be focusing on an article titled, Who Truly Suffers When DEI is Taken Away? It's more than just Black Americans.
Right.
So we're going a little beyond just the basics here.
Yeah.
We're going to use this article to kind of springboard into some deeper concepts and some of the impacts that happen when these initiatives are diminished or even removed.
Okay.
So to get started, I think it's important to level set here. DEI, what are we talking about? What is it?
DEI at its core is about creating spaces where everyone feels valued, respected, and included, regardless of their background.
Mm-hmm.
It's about really dismantling those systemic barriers that prevent equal treatment and equal opportunity for everybody.
And a lot of people think that this is kind of a new idea, but is it really?
Not at all.
Mm.
The article actually does a great job of tracing DEI's roots back to the civil rights movement of the 1960s.
Oh, wow.
Which is a powerful reminder of the historical context.
Hmm.
This isn't some new fad. It's connected to decades of activism and efforts to create a fairer society.
Mm-hmm. So does that mean if we go back on some of these things, are we going to be going back to those systems that caused a lot of these inequities?
That's a critical question that the article raises. Neglecting DEI isn't just about missing out on potential benefits. It could actually set us back and reinforce those historical inequities.
Oh, wow.
And potentially impact future generations.
So it's more than just feel-good intentions or, just being nice to people.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's where things get really interesting. The article highlights research showing that diverse teams are measurably more innovative.
Oh, okay.
They found in one study that companies with above-average diversity scores were 70% more likely to capture a new market.
Wow.
And 45% more likely to report a growth in market share.
Mm-hmm.
So that's not just good intentions, that's good business.
So we're talking about real, tangible effects.
Absolutely.
It's not just some concept that's fuzzy and out there.
Right. And it's interesting that when we think about affirmative action in the 1970s as a key step in DEI,
Yeah.
even affirmative action itself had different approaches.
Yeah.
Some focused on outreach and recruitment, others focused on quotas.
Mm-hmm.
And that evolution from quotas to broader inclusion, I think, really reflects our growing understanding of DEI's complexities.
So it's about how we get there just as much as the outcome.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And it really ties into the core of what this article is getting at. DEI is about creating spaces where everyone feels valued, respected, and truly included so that they can actually contribute their unique talents and perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
And if we neglect DEI, we're really risking losing that potential for innovation and progress.
Speaking of progress, the article really focuses on the impact of DEI on Black Americans.
Right.
It points out that there's been an increase in representation in education leadership roles in the workforce. But how does that impact everybody else?
Well, that's where the article introduces this fascinating concept called intersectionality. And intersectionality is really about how different forms of marginalization like race, gender, sexual orientation, and disability can overlap and create unique experiences of inequality.
So it's not just about one group. We have to think about how all of these different identities intersect and how that impacts individuals.
Exactly. And that's a really crucial point because it highlights the ripple effect of DEI.
Yeah.
If we neglect DEI for one group, it creates this chain reaction that impacts everyone.
Yeah.
And the article specifically mentions indigenous peoples, the Latinx community, women, LGBTQ plus individuals, people with disabilities. They're all part of this intricate web.
Yeah. So if DEI is about creating a space where everyone feels included, then neglecting it's going to have these consequences for all of these groups.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's like pulling on a thread on a sweater.
Right.
And eventually the whole thing is going to unravel.
Yeah. And the article even uses that imagery.
But does it?
It talks about the social fabric of a community kind of fraying when DEI is neglected.
So what does that actually look like? How does that actually manifest?
Well, I think you see a potential increase in discrimination. You see an erosion of community cohesion and restricted access to resources for marginalized groups.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just about numbers.
Right.
It's about quality of life for everyone.
The article focuses on one specific area, the business world, and it makes a really strong case that DEI is not just a nice to have, it actually makes businesses more successful.
Absolutely. The data is very clear on that. Companies with diverse leadership teams are more profitable.
Okay.
They're more innovative. They're better at adapting to change which is crucial in today's fast-paced world.
Yeah, I feel like some people might think that DEI is a distraction from the real work of like
Right.
selling a product or whatever it is that your business does.
Right.
But it sounds like it's actually essential to growing and being successful.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The article brings up some examples like Google and Microsoft, who are known for their commitment to DEI
Mm-hmm.
and also their industry-leading innovation. It's not a coincidence.
Right.
Diverse perspectives at the table lead to better decision-making,
Okay.
more creative problem-solving, and a deeper understanding of customer bases, which are increasingly diverse.
So it's not just some feel-good thing. It can actually hurt your bottom line.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And on the flip side, embracing DEI can be a competitive advantage.
Okay.
The article points out that diverse companies are better at attracting top talent, especially from younger generations who prioritize inclusion.
That makes sense. And they talk a lot about the next generation as well and how DEI plays a role in education.
Yes.
What stood out to you from that section?
One thing that really resonated with me was this idea that schools without DEI risk becoming echo chambers,
Interesting.
limiting the perspectives that students are exposed to. And that's not just about representing different cultures.
Yeah, right.
It's about fostering critical thinking skills
Mm.
and preparing students for a world that's increasingly interconnected.
Yeah, I remember reading about a study that showed that students in diverse classrooms performed better on critical thinking assessments.
Exactly.
It's like their minds were being stretched in ways that wouldn't happen in a homogeneous environment.
That's a great example.
Yeah.
And the article also mentions a study that found that students who are exposed to diverse perspectives in school were less likely to hold prejudiced views later in life.
It makes you wonder what happens when those diverse voices are missing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's not just about minority students.
Okay.
The article makes the point that a lack of DEI in schools can actually perpetuate stereotypes and limit learning for all students,
Oh, wow.
regardless of their background.
That's interesting. I never thought about it that way, but it makes sense. If you're only exposed to one way of thinking, you're not really learning to think critically or challenge your own assumptions.
Right. And the article points out that those critical thinking skills are essential for success in a globalized workforce.
Mm-hmm.
So neglecting DEI in education could actually hinder our overall economic competitiveness.
It's really interesting how all of these pieces fit together,
They're
from
so-
the history of DEI to business and education,
Yeah.
and to our own individual lives. It's not an isolated issue.
And what's fascinating is the article goes beyond the U.S. and looks at DEI from a global perspective.
Oh, does it?
It offers examples from Europe, Asia, Africa, and South America.
Wow.
And it shows that while the specific challenges might differ, the core principles of DEI are universally relevant.
So it's a human problem, not just a U.S. problem.
Exactly. And I think that's a really important takeaway because sometimes we can get caught up in our own national narratives, but DEI is something that people are grappling with all over the world.
So what are some of the ways that these challenges are playing out globally?
Well, for example, in Europe, we see the rise of populism and backlash against multiculturalism, which can create divisions within society and kind of go against the grain of DEI.
All right.
And in countries like India, where you have caste-based discrimination that's still deeply entrenched, DEI initiatives are crucial for breaking down those barriers and creating a more just and equitable society.
And they talked about South Africa as well.
Yeah, South Africa, even after the end of apartheid, is still struggling with equality.
Yeah.
And it's a reminder that the fight for DEI is a long and complex one,
Mm-hmm.
and it takes different forms in different contexts. But the core principles valuing diversity, promoting equity, and fostering inclusion are relevant everywhere.
It's amazing how we can start with this article and have a conversation that covers all of these different areas.
It is fascinating.
Going from historical context to the global perspective, looking at business, the individual, all of that, it's clear that DEI touches everything. So after all of this, what are the big takeaways from our deep dive into DEI? What should our listeners remember?
I think the most important thing to remember is that DEI is much more than just numbers. It's not just about representation. It's about fostering a real culture of belonging where everyone feels valued and respected and empowered to, contribute their unique perspectives.
And the research really backs that up. This isn't just some kind of nice idea.
Exactly.
Diverse teams and inclusive companies actually do better.
They do.
They're more innovative, they're more profitable,
Absolutely.
and, they can handle change better.
Right.
But even beyond the business case, there's a moral imperative here, too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
DEI is fundamentally about creating a fairer society.
Yeah.
It's about making sure that everyone has a real opportunity to thrive.
Mm-hmm.
regardless of their background or identity.
Right. And the article ends with a call to action. They want people to actually do something to support DEI. What would you say to our listener, someone who's listening to this and they're like, okay, I want to do something. What can I do?
Well, I think it starts with education. Learn about the history of DEI. Understand the different forms of bias and discrimination that exist. And challenge your own assumptions.
Mm-hmm.
We all have them.
Yeah.
Acknowledging them is the first step.
And don't be silent if you see something wrong.
Right.
Whether it's a joke that's not okay or, calling out microaggressions or even advocating for policies that are going to promote equity and inclusion, your voice actually matters.
It really does. And, I think a lot of people get intimidated by this. They feel like they need to be an expert to get involved.
Yeah.
But supporting DEI is a journey. It's not a destination.
Right.
It's about learning, growing, and being open to different perspectives.
And I think one thing that we've really seen in this deep dive is that neglecting DEI, it's not like we're just ignoring something.
Right.
There are real consequences.
There are.
Not just for specific groups,
Well, all of us.
but for everybody.
Exactly.
So if we're potentially holding ourselves back and limiting our perspectives by not embracing DEI, can we afford to ignore it?
That's the question.
That's the question. I think that's a great place to leave it. So thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into DEI, and we'll see you next time.